Welcome back to the second part of the bot API module. I'll show you today how to interact with the Binance API to obtain history data. Let's look at the code together. I prepared a few lines to save time. We look at the history of the price movement of Ethereum versus Bitcoin. We look at the interval of 1 minute. You can go up from 1 minute to a few months. And now we make use of this date time library I mentioned at the beginning of the video. We provide a date, so the 30th of January last year. We want to have a Unix timestamp, so we make .timestamp. We multiply with 1000 and we make a type conversion to integer, since Binance API want to have integers in milliseconds. We also create a variable called end, which is just a start plus 1 minute. And now we have an URL. This you can look up at the documentation of the Binance API. And we have to provide the pair, the period, the start and the end date. And now we can write a few lines of code together. We make use of this library I also mentioned in the beginning, requests. And there is one function called get, and we provide the URL we have from the Binance API documentation. To have it in a readable format, we need the JSON file, or the JSON type. And now we can look at it, what the function or the API returns to us. Take some time. Okay. Again, it's in a pretty ugly format. I describe now, this is the timestamp in milliseconds in a Unix timestamp. Then I think it's the open price, but it's really annoying to make sense of these numbers when you don't know the meaning. So we provide some labels. You can look them up in the Binance API documentation as well. So now let's write some code that associates each number with its meaning. We use this lovely F string. I'm really a fan of the F strings. Okay. Now it's more readable. We have a date or a timestamp, a Unix timestamp, an open price, the highest price, the lowest and the close for one ticker or one interval of 1 minute. But for our time series analysis in our code or in our bots, we don't use every label, and we just use the first 5. Now run it again. Here you can see what we use for our code, for our bots. This code we wrote now is functional in the sense that we get the history data of a coin for a given period. In our case it was 1 minute, and we have a start and end date, which is a really short period here, a short interval. But we can write now a function in our bot API class that is generic in a sense that we can provide any pair and any start and end date we want, so that our bot can use it for the analysis of the time series. We call this function return chart data. It receives a few arguments called pair, start and period. We create a list called chart list, and it's a container for all the tickers we create with our requests, with a start time and start date. And as you remember from before, we have multiply with 1000 and convert it to an integer. Then I left out an important fact. The Binance API allows you only to access 1000 tickers or 1000 data points from the history, which means that if we want to cover a long extensive period, we have to split up our request. To calculate how many frames we need, we calculate this in this. We calculate this here with num_parts. We make use of a rounding function of math. Oh, I forgot to mention that we have to import this. Import math. We calculate the difference between the end and the start. We divide this by the period, which we have to multiply times 1000, since it also has to be in milliseconds, and we multiply it as well with 1000, since it is only allowed to be, and the one frame is only allowed to be 1000 time stamps or tickers. Now we have end and start. We get the whole period in milliseconds. We divide through the period in milliseconds. We get how many periods we have, and this is only allowed to be 1000 long. So if you have 5000, we need 5 different frames, or split our request in 5 different frames. We do this in a loop. Okay, what does this mean? I explained to you that we have different frames. We split up our history, and the first frame, so E starts to be with 0. We have just our start we wanted to have, and then we add 1,000 tickers to this in milliseconds to have the sub end, and we'll repeat this over and over until we have all our frames of the whole request. Now we need an F string. The actual URL we need for our API request. I hope I don't make any typo. We make use of our variables we defined before. Our period we wanted to have. In our example it was 1 minute. We have the different substarts for each frame. And we have the different sub ends. Now I haven't defined period string here. Can make it like this, but in a later video we will integrate this in the whole ensemble with all the different modules or scripts. We then provide this as a variable. You know now how to make a request with a URL, just like before. Request.get URL. Then we have our container called shortlist, where we use the function, the built-in function extend to we transform it again into the JSON so that it's readable. We transform it into an array. Why I do this, I show you in one of the next lines. Essentially, we have to make a mathematical operation, and this is not possible with a list. Oh, I have to import numpy. The data we want to return with this API code, or the code of this function, we call this data. We want all rows, which each row is a timestamp or a ticker, and we want 5 columns: open, high, low, close, and volume for this array, and the index is the date, the timestamp. Since we apply this, or we use this function, this API function, in our bot chart module, and in this class we use this function here and make from data and index a data frame in pandas. But first, since we in Binance in Binance everything is in milliseconds, but we have in the rest of the code everything in seconds, so we have to make a mathematical operation I announced before. We just take the first column, the date, and we divide it by 1000 and return it as integer. We transform it back into a list, and then we return data, our list, our index. Exactly. This is how our return chart data function looks like, and it's used in the output chart class. To make the code of our return chart data more robust, we include the try and accept block like we did in all different bot API functions. But now, since it's a request without making use of the Python Binance library, we have to include a different line called request raise for status. And if we didn't use this line, an error would not be caught. So it's essential to have this line. Oh, I forgot to write try. And it raises an error, and it's caught as error, and we can print this error, and we print also request failed, just for us that we can read it in the console. We make a time sleep as always to increase the possibility that it works with the second try. And yeah, that's the extension I wanted to make for this return chart data function. I wanted to make a second amendment, since this line 51 isn't really generic. We set it fix that each interval of our history data is 1 minute long, or each ticker. So we delete this line and instead replace it with a different line. And before that, I want to show that I made an amendment in our constructor. We have now a dictionary that works as a translator, which takes in the interval in seconds and returns the interval in a string format, like Binance wanted in their requests. Or yeah, so I provide a different line where I access the new dictionary, and this period in seconds is now translated into a period string and then as an input in our request. Now our code looks much better. I'm glad that you learned how to interact with the Binance API to access history data, as well as put it in optimal formats. With a little tweak, we see in the next video that we can use the same codes to obtain live data as well. Hope to see you there.